Transport and Infrastructure Committee meeting 8:08. It's 9:04 a.m. We'll make a start. It's welcome to all committee councillors. Councillor Peter Young's just running about 10 minutes late, but he'll be joining us. And welcome to Councillor Barden Lumsden, Councillor O'Neill, Councillor Gates and Councillor Tozer. Thank you for joining this morning. If I could have, there's no leaves of absence. Oh, there you go. Councillor Peter Young's arrived. There you go. It was a quick 10 minutes. Okay. If I could have someone, there's no leave of absence, confirmation of minutes. If I could have someone to move the minutes from the last meeting, moved by Councillor Patterson, seconded by Councillor Taylor. All those in favour? That's carried. Did anyone have any conflicts of interest declarations before we kick the meeting off? I'll go to you, Councillor Vorster.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, on today's agenda there is an item 6.3 that deals with the Robina Central Planning and Transport Study. Under an older conflict of interest regime, I voluntarily, in an abundance of caution, noted that various parties linked to my family and so on and so forth, several degrees removed, had an interest in the Robina Central Planning area. Under the new regime, and certainly on reflection, I don't intend making any declaration whatsoever because the issues canvassed in the report affect a significant number of people in the local government area, and therefore there's an exemption that attaches to our consideration of the item and the projects therein. So I just wanted to flag that with councillors in case anyone had a dissenting view, but I think when you're dealing with trunk infrastructure projects, you're by definition dealing with projects that affect a significant number of people in the local government area, and therefore I generally regard them as exempt from a DCOI.
Thanks for bringing that to our attention, Councillor Vorster. Was there anybody that had a question for Councillor Vorster? Okay, that's great. We'll move on then. So we've got councillors' two starred items there, item 5.1 and 6.1. Did you want to unstar either of those? If I could have someone move. So moved by Councillor Vorster, seconded by Councillor Patterson. All those in favour? That's carried. The Mayor was going to join us for the presentation, so I just don't want to start. Not coming down. What do you reckon?
I can.
We could probably move to 6.2 road safety plan.
Okay. All right, the Mayor wants to join us for items 6.4 and 6.5, so we'll go to 6. Hasn't arrived yet, so we'll go to 6.2. Gold Coast Road Safety Plan 2021 to 2026. And did anyone have any questions? Going to Councillor Owen Jones and Councillor Vorster.
Thank you, Chair. So I just had a question, I've got a couple of questions, but the first one is just in regards to serious injuries, if any, that we know about in regards to the public transport use of the city. So specifically both light rail and bus, whether or not there are any figures in that space.
Through you, Madam Chair, what we do know is a very low injury and accident rate on public transport. So compared to the other modes, they are regarded as probably being the safest forms of transport generally, and that has been borne out in what we know from the data for the city.
So I think particularly with light rail, it impresses me that that is the case given the size of the light rail and the proximity to pedestrians in our tourist hub. So I think it's something that we should actually emphasise as a positive outcome. So whilst it's a road safety plan, clearly road safety is about, in my view, that modal shift as well. So the more we can encourage people on public transport, the better we will be. I had a broad question. It would appear to me that the majority of fatalities in the Gold Coast local government area are on state-controlled roads. And I was particularly interested if whether or not the state has looked at doing anything in terms of formalising, maybe with agreement of the family, markers on the sides of roads to actually help indicate to the road users where fatalities or serious incidents may have happened.
Through you, Madam Chair, there is a program that the state do have, and I'm aware of a few markers. I'm not sure how this particular regional office has progressed that. Matt, you might be able to shed some light.
Thanks, Alan. Through you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Councillor. We can certainly ask the question. We've got a quarterly road safety partnership group next week, Councillor. So I know over the years they've evolved their policy stance around roadside markers in memoriam or other, whether... like I said, it's probably timely that we ask the local district office around their current policy in this space and see whether we can do something that helps advocate for safer use of the road system, if that's the case.
So just on that, look, my view would be that if we can do something that really doesn't offend the families, it would need to be in agreement with them. But so we have these roadside memorials that pop up, but I was thinking more specifically maybe a marker of some description actually on the road, and whether or not it would only be for a short period of time, but it would help emphasise where accidents had occurred, because I think whether or not it's on the Gold Coast or Queensland, clearly something different needs to be done than what's been done, and I think the numbers in Queensland aren't coming down significantly either. So to me, it's what could we potentially do differently that would help emphasise on the network. And there's no point in us just doing it on roads that we control, because I'm assuming that what's the Torum, so we'd need to do something in conjunction with the state, but I think it'd be worthwhile exploring. And then my final question was just in regards to traffic calming. So I think there was an inference that we would be looking at traffic calming, but what were we to do in that space?
Through you, Madam Chair. So, councillors, one of the year one actions is to review our local area traffic management policy with a view to ensure that we are 2021-22 best practice, not only with the technical proposals, but also with the level of customer service that we provide to those residents or visitors to the area, that we make sure that there's a communication that's very clear into why we do or we do not do certain types of traffic calming or local area traffic management intervention.
So traffic calming, speed bumps is effectively in suburban roads or chicanes, or
all of the above. So basically, the task that I've set the team is to look laterally around what is best practice nationally, certainly, and we need to respect the state jurisdictional legislation, as you've just cross-referenced before, but make sure that we are at least doing what is considered current best practice in relation to road safety and the contribution of traffic calming to a safer road environment in those lower order streets.
Yeah, because I think my experience with when somebody asks you to do traffic calming or put in speed bumps, it's, you know, my default answer is that we've got a policy that says that we don't do it because they're really noisy, but it's seen as the first thing that people want to suggest, and it's probably the last thing that people want to see installed because they're incredibly noisy.
So I'm going to go to Councillor Vorster next, then Councillor Patterson, then Councillor O'Neill, just so we all know where we're at.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Like Councillor Jones, just a few questions. So the plan clearly attempts to rely on evidence to track performance over time and, you know, the success of the initiatives, with a focus on injury and fatality. As we've established in earlier meetings, there's a significant lag in the data, and we've talked a little bit about engaging with the Gold Coast University Hospital to try and use some of the data that they collect about incoming patients, because we know for a fact that they collect information about where injuries are required and how. Was that ultimately reflected in the report? I mean, I didn't see it, sorry, in the plan. Did we make an approach to the Gold Coast University Hospital about tapping into some of that data so that we can make a more contemporaneous assessment of whether specific investments are paying dividends or not?
Through you, Madam Chair. In short, Councillor Forster, yes, we have, and we have a regular. Our line of communication is via Queensland Health, and certainly Queensland Health are a partner on a lot of our transport initiatives, particularly in the sustainable and safe space. We've made a lot of progress in the last number of years with the first iteration of the road safety plan. I believe, and I commit to you, that I still think there's progress to be made in that space, and certainly the access to meaningful and current and accurate data is still a big drive, and I think you'll see that emanating through a lot of the communication we have around the current transport projects and programs we have. We want it to be highly evidence-driven.
Yeah. So, Madam Chair, I'll reflect on this between now and full council, but I would really like to, at least from a council point of view, formalise that approach with Queensland Health, because when it comes time to nominating black spot projects, for example, it'd be great to understand, based on the, how do I put it, on the human cost over time of incidents at specific locations. If we can quantify it, then we're probably in a better position to nominate projects that will do the most good for the most number. So I'm happy to take those comments through you, Madam Chair, to Matt on good faith, but I will reflect on just whether I want to attempt to strengthen that up a little bit. But I'll flag that. I think this is really playing to the question that Councillor Owen-Jones asked, but I've got a keen interest in the tactical treatments that can be used to improve safety and manage amenity in suburban streets. Now, I don't support generally speed humps and wombat crossings and all the rest. I think we've all established that most of the time they cause more amenity issues than they solve. But as I've said in 2 meetings now concerning the road safety plan, I believe that there is a role for temporary speed humps, the likes that we have in our community centre car parks and that I've seen on roads. I think there's a place for that in streets as a tactical measure to demonstrate to our communities the case for or the case against this form of traffic calming. I haven't seen any progress towards including that, yet I have seen those strips included in presentations around roundabouts, right? So I just wanted to know, have we ruled that in, have we ruled that out, and at what point will we endorse a suite of tactical measures?
Through you, Madam Chair. Councillor Forster, thank you. It is a salient point, and certainly as part of our best practice review of local area traffic management, the application of temporary treatments will be a consideration there to ensure that we aren't inadvertently inducing any different road safety issues by the temporary implementation of measures which can sometimes catch regular users of roads off guard. Yeah,
and look, I'm going to say something really unpopular, and it's not casting any professional aspersions here, but quite often in my experience there's a wide gap between what city officers might say is best practice and what the community, I think, quite reasonably suggests needs to happen in order to improve a local road safety issue. For example, I had a case, and councillors, you may have had a similar situation to this. I had a case where there's effectively a lower order road interfacing with a low order road at an intersection. And residents asked for a give way sign to be installed on the lower order road, right, to address some safety issues that they've been complaining about for many years. And in the end, city officers ruled out supporting a give way sign at that intersection because they said there was a brick pavement treatment at the intersection and drivers would become too confused with the give way sign and the brick treatment on the approach to the intersection. Now, that may be codified somewhere in some standards. I'm certain it must be because city officers pointed to that. But that's an example of a very reasonable suggestion put forward by a community through consultation. And I'm just concerned that if we adopt a road safety plan and all of these things that bind us to a course of action, it'll become increasingly difficult for us to meet community expectation on small, reasonable things. So, Matt, I'm happy to provide you with a copy of that CR so you can, you know...
I know the one you're referring to, Councillor, yeah.
Yeah, so I just want to use that as an example to say that sometimes the community are prepared for a trade-off, and when it's a local road, when we're dealing with local traffic and people can become quickly accustomed to new driving conditions, we shouldn't put the blinkers on, to excuse the pun. Right?
Councillor Vorster, can I just provide some assurance to you and the other councillors? In examples like that, we are very happy to review that advice and to put a lens of practicality on the advice that's been received. I think what Matt has alluded to earlier, sorry, not alluded to, directly referred to a review of contemporaneous practice around local area traffic management applications will include things like that. So what we are focused on are outcomes that are both technically acceptable and are acceptable to the community. So you have our commitment. That is our aim. I don't see anything in the plan before us that would preclude that from happening.
Right. Madam Chair, through you to the Director, thanks for that assurance. And just lastly, on page 98, not 98, it's page 96. We look at action item 2.7. It reads here, develop an evidence-based initiative to prioritise improvements to crossing facilities for pedestrians across the city's transport network. I just want to flag that quite often, in my experience, there is an obvious pedestrian crossing issue. Right? There's an obvious need to provide a safe way for kids, potentially, to cross 4 lanes of traffic to get to school, to get to a park. It's something I've spoken pretty passionately about when we've considered specific development applications, for example. And sometimes city officers will say, we've carried out a pedestrian movement study and assessment and volumes are too low in order to justify looking at this any further. And I would say, Madam Chair, through you to the Director, the reason why the volumes are too low is because it's manifestly unsafe for people to attempt to cross. And because they're not crossing, they're instead hopping in a motor vehicle, putting issues on the local road network. I mean, I've got one on Christine Avenue, for example, which is not the one that might spring to mind because you'd be familiar with Christine Avenue. And it sits just to the east of Conda Way before Varsity Parade. And it's 4 lanes of traffic between 2 bus stops. And no one's using public transport because nobody can safely cross the road. And yet when city officers carry out a safety assessment, and a pedestrian movement assessment, they said, it's unjustifiable because volumes are too low. So I just want to flag that when we look at an evidence-based approach to the merits of a crossing, I don't think it's appropriate to look solely at the number of pedestrian movements, and there must be some framework that's easily understood by councillors in the community to understand what benefits might flow or what volumes we may see across that road if there was a safe way for people to traverse it. So I just want to flag that. It's, I suppose, not so much a question, but some feedback. Thank you.
Madam Chair, we're certainly aware of the concern, and look, there's the old adage, build it and they shall come. So we know that applies in a lot of instances, but you can go overboard in the same thing. And unfortunately, history is littered of examples where things have been built and people haven't come. So it is, it's somewhat of a science on the evidential base and somewhat of an art in understanding what the outcomes will be achieved. So we certainly work towards the provision of infrastructure that is evidence-based and hopefully will overcome those issues and will support demand.
Sorry, do you mind if I just add, through you, Madam Chair? Councillor Vorster, you alluded to wonderfully, there are certain standards that we refer to in the traffic management world. There are very black and white standards that it would be foolish of us to depart from. There are other standards that are a little bit grey where we look for solution focus. If we can find the solution using the standards to our advantage. The one you're referring to around induced demand at pedestrian crossings is actually forms part of our Austroads guidelines, so there is some flexibility there. Just like we do when we prioritise active transport projects, we look for induced demand. We look for the outcomes that we're trying to achieve to get people to use these facilities on the basis that it's an unmet need at the moment. So that is part of that action. The way it's worded, Action 2.7, is to take exactly what you just said into account and looking at future demand and servicing that unmet need.
All done now, Councillor Vorster? Yeah, okay. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, to the Director. Two of the biggest concerns of road safety in my division, one is Cotloo-Currumborough. So we're spending $15 million making sure that Cotloo is safe and suitable for the future. But as you know, at the end of that, we have the intersection Cotloo-Currumborough, which is the state road. And I know that you have made the case to the state government about why it's so important that that intersection gets upgraded, yet they're not coming to the party, even though we see that as possibly the greatest risk in that area. I've also got the concern on Coolabah-Lillypilly, where our officers spent significant investment to do the plans to put it in for the black spot funding. So two of the greatest risks in my division are left wanting because the state government isn't coming to the party. So my question is, what do we do about that? It occurs to me that you've exhausted your channels in getting them to do what they need to do. What do you think is the next step?
Through you, Madam Chair, I don't believe we've entirely exhausted it. So what we've successfully applied with the state in the past is we don't go away. So we continue to agitate, we continue to gather evidence. It's a compelling case, as you've noted, the amount of investment that we've put in Cotloo Street, to then turn around to the state and say, we've absolutely done our task here and this is what you need to do. So our investment schedule, our evidence gathering, our planning, we continually go back to the state with a compelling case, and I think it gets more compelling over time. And eventually, we've been successful in many, many cases in the past. So I'm, again, optimistic that, those matters on the state network will be attended to. But there's as has been said here already this morning, there are a lot of state-controlled roads in the city and there are a lot of issues on them. So part of Matt and I, our role is to meet with the state and to make them aware of exactly what those issues are, and not doing their job for them, but to offer them, here is a very good opportunity that you should really invest in because here's the payoff. So all I can say to you and the community is that we will continue that fight for advocacy for those really important projects. What I can suggest in addition is yourself as the local elected rep and other community members who feel similarly to petition the state directly and let the local regional director know of your concerns, which will support our approaches.
I think Councillor O'Neill is next, then Councillor Taylor, Gates, Peter Young and Caldwell.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'm just wondering if you've been able to gauge the success of reducing speed from 50 to 40 in some local roads. I just want to draw your attention to Pacific Parade in Balinga, for instance. I'm getting more complaints about speeding in that road since we reduced it to 40. I don't know whether that's just, someone not really aware of there's been a reduction. And we also have a lot more cars on the road at the moment because Gold Coast Highway is pushing traffic onto our local road system, Golden Four and Pacific Parade, because of the heavy vehicle checkpoint there. But we've done in that Pacific Parade, we've actually done more to make people aware of the lower speed limit than anywhere else in my division. Like, we've painted different colours at each end of that road. We've actually done on-road pavement, the speed limit. I just wonder if you've had any gauge of whether the reduction from 50 to 40 is actually doing what it's supposed to do in local roads.
Through you, Madam Chair. Councillor Neal, thank you for the question. In generic answer is yes, we do monitor these things and we do collect a whole lot of data around the performance of the network. I'll have to take the question on notice specifically around Pacific Parade, if you don't mind. Often, and the theory around this is often if you reduce the speed limit, the speed environment usually follows. It doesn't usually match the speed limit. If there is an 85th percentile speed that exceeds the posted speed limit, but it usually follows trend, if that makes sense. So usually you do get a holistic reduction in the speed, the 85th percentile speed, which is one of the measurements we use. In terms of the specifics around how Pacific Parade is performing, if you don't mind, I'll get back to you on that one specifically.
And Councillor O'Neill, absolutely there is more traffic on that network as a result of the Gold Coast Highway with the COVID situation at the moment. So it may have some effect, but we'll look into that as part of getting back to you.
Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, and through the chair, I just want to talk a bit about the emerging mobility modes that it's around the city, and I'm constantly getting a lot of emails and concerns from residents. Obviously, at the moment we're during COVID, so I don't think the impact has been as great. But is there any way of getting any statistics of what incidents we do have in these particular areas around, accidents, incidents? And also, I know you mentioned in the report that it's an emerging scenario, but I'm hearing a lot of stories about incidents, but is there any way of us starting to get some more statistics to understand, is there much incidents that cause what type of injuries and to what levels? Because we are getting a lot busier and a lot more of this type of mode out there.
Councillor Taylor, is that with all modes, are you saying?
We're talking electric scooters, any type of electric type mode, because every year we come out with some new form of electric mode out there. So scooters, bikes, skateboards, and with all our ocean ways, it's become a more popular form of mode, and we're getting a lot of concerns from residents on our active transports that a lot of these types of modes are, causing concerns out there. So,
And is that specifically in your area?
I'm noticing from Broadbeach right through to Main Beach, and it seems to be the main strip. I'm getting most of it, but it's those active transport areas where people are getting out there and they're using these modes for transport around the city. So,
Through you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Councillor Taylor. So, in short, the answer will be yes. We are getting better and more mature in that data inventory because it's there are emerging modes. The data itself is less mature than what you might have in more traditional transport modes, but it's an emerging area of intelligence that we are becoming more aware of. We're collecting a whole lot of data ourselves right now as part of our Year 1's Shared Path initiative. We've got a lot of data collection underway right now. Some of that's around speed, some of it's around use, some of it's around classification of use. That will help inform an intention to have a bespoke road safety campaign or intervention around the use of the shared paths in the city, particularly the coastal corridor, based on intelligence that we've gathered over this time. The other delivery partners of road safety, the QPS, don't have as much of a role in the shared paths. Our friends in TMR do as well because of their active transport policies. But certainly the more intelligence we can gather, as per Councillor Vorster's comment before, around from the various data sources, again, we want to make sure that we're putting informed policy recommendations to the Council around how we mitigate the likelihood and severity of the incidents involving the micromobility class.
Councillor Gates.
I have a question about U-turn signage. I understand the constraints of the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, but I've had several requests at one location for a no U-turn permitted sign, and every time I've requested it's been rejected. And yet I see on Olsen Avenue near Crestwood there is a no U-turn sign at that intersection. And I'm just wondering why it's okay in some scenarios and not in others where there is an accident history where people, I mean, you put the U-turn permitted signage in, and the advice I've had is that that's where it's permitted, there's a sign, and if there's no sign, then it's not permitted. But I have seen no U-turn signage, so it's just a query I have.
See, Madam Chair, you're correct, Councillor Gates, in suggesting that usually the vast majority of times the signage is applied when it contradicts the road rules, if I can say that. There have been departures from this. We've seen it along the light rail stage 1 corridor where we were able to put in that was the city's led intervention there to remind people that they weren't to do U-turns across the tracks at signalised intersections. So it was a complementary sign to reiterate road rules that did apply. So that can be, can I say by exception, some departures from the road rules and the way in which the TMR govern the use of the MUTCD. So I'm not aware of the CR that you're referring to personally, so I might have a look into that further on your behalf and see whether there is a precedent that we can call upon to get a good outcome.
Road where we replaced that very large roundabout with the signalised intersection, and it's westbound traffic trying to do a U-turn where people don't expect it and they get rammed up the rear end.
Councillor Peter Young.
Thank you, Chair. There's a few things I'd like to raise or question. One is about education, and on page 67 we see a good summary or a couple of good examples of education that is able to be provided and supported by the city. So I wonder what the action items are in particular regard to that, because that to me is pretty low-hanging fruit, and we could be investing in a big program of pushing that into the schools, and that's going to help us a lot into the future. So just specifically about that, thanks.
Through you, Madam Chair, thank you for the question, Councillor Young. So it's a fundamental part of the Council's existing active school travel program. So we push road safety through that program very, very strongly. Outside of that program, what we're looking at is, as is shown here in the example on page 67, these sorts of initiatives. This particular one is a local initiative, and trying to partner with those providers to push this out a little bit further. So it's something we haven't done to date, but with this iteration of the plan, we've recognised that these are things which are pretty important, and they're really strong messages, and we've seen enough of initiatives like this to understand that they do have a profound effect on that particular cohort.
Secondly, about our speed awareness devices, the smiley signs, I like to rely upon them. I think they're a good initiative, and they're welcomed by the community, but our data is perhaps a little bit lacking. Is there the capacity for us to retrofit these devices with cameras to provide further information to the police rather than just the statistical data that's captured?
Through you, Madam Chair, we are investigating this technology. It has grown and changed since we bought the devices and installed them on the network. So they're new devices which are more capable, who read, for example, multiple lanes and have, I guess, a better data output. So it's something we're currently investigating.
My third question and topic is local area traffic management. It's been mentioned earlier, and certainly that's the biggest call. You know, I might get 3 of those a week from the community, people asking for some kind of traffic calming in their local street. And it's impossible to meet that demand, and it's often undesirable, as has been pointed out. These local area traffic management features often bring unwanted side effects. But one of the biggest things, in my point of view, as a divisional councillor, is the lack of funds to be able to put into those. They're very expensive. The ramps themselves might be very expensive. Then there's upgrades normally to street lighting or to drainage. And I wonder if we should be particularly looking at investing, giving councillors better opportunity to invest in that sort of stuff with a budgeted addition to our local area works provision each year. I mean, that's obviously ultimately up to us, but I'm just kind of raising it as a topic here. That in a budget year, we might give ourselves another $100,000, which is $1.4 million, which isn't a lot, really, and might provide us the opportunity to deliver really genuine local benefits that are visible and help achieve those speed outcomes. It's not something for the director necessarily, it's for us to contemplate. Anyway, thanks. I'm very happy to be seeing this report and we'll be endorsing it. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Young. Just so that everyone knows where we're at, it's Councillor Caldwell, Councillor Tozer, Councillor Ryan Bowden Lumsden.
My go.
Yeah.
Awesome. So my comment actually followed on initially from Councillor Patterson's comment, and that is about the state investment in the road network. And when our mate from the state came in here, my concern is, and will continue to be, that whilst they want to deliver the Coomera Connector, they will take their eyes off the ball of the smaller projects that are very important interventions on our more localised road networks. So we saw yesterday the news that they've paid $74 million to resume property. $74 million, which if you spread that out across 10 or 15 or 20 intersections, would make a huge difference to the road network. And that's the magnitude of what we're requiring from them. So when we have $5 million set aside for the Pine Ridge Road, Brisbane Road intersection, and it sits there year on year because we're waiting for the state to stump up, it's very, very frustrating. And so I don't think Councillor Patterson's comments were limited just to her examples. I think there is probably live examples of that across the entire city where the state appetite for getting involved to partner on those intersections where state and local roads intersect has been left wanting, and it needs to change because we are continually getting frustrated by us trying to make improvements and then getting let down time and time again. And that to some extent feeds into my next point, which is around speed revisions and where we want traffic to be travelling. And that is, we want primary thoroughfare traffic on state arterial roads. And when they don't provide an environment that is of a higher traffic standard and carriage and flow than local roads, people start looking for alternatives and they start going onto our local roads and ducking and weaving through back streets and taking shortcuts and trying to go in places where we actually don't have roads designed in our network to take that capacity. So the state needs to, again, get on board with making sure roads like Oxley Drive act as a proper state-controlled major thoroughfare. Clear out the roundabouts, like at Lay Drive and Oxley, and then increase the speed limit so that there is actually an incentive for people to be on the proper road network where they're supposed to be travelling long distances. That then takes pressure off our local roads like Columbus and Jacaranda, where everyone starts zipping through the back streets of Holywell and Runaway Bay in order to get off a very frustratingly slow state road. So speed reductions are not always the answer, because in the end people want to have an option where the primary pathway, which should be the state roads, are faster and carry more traffic and get them longer distances from A to B in a better travel environment than what we can and should be providing them on what are essentially small residential streets. So that's my 2 cents worth, is that there needs to be a better response from the state, because at the moment, there's absolutely no interest from them that I can see in activating these smaller intersection upgrades that are critically important.
Sorry, Madam Chair, do you mind, a couple of fantastic comments there, Councillor Caldwell. Can I just deal with them one at a time? The first one, I've got a live example, and I can cite a number of live examples where we have generated, as the city, we have generated an investigation into where a local road intersects with a state road, where the state, because of the evidence base we have provided to them, the state have had to act upon that, and they've injected that into their QTIP program. The scale of those projects that you might be referring to, I'm not talking about the major intersection, I'm talking about probably the small to mid-level intersections. They can act reasonably quick on there based on evidence. Now, the evidence, I can't cite the example in open session because it's still going through their planning process, but it is one where they had no intention to intervene at all. We collected data, we did a fair bit of background work to a point where they have now injected it into their QTRIP program with the intention of intervening in the next couple of years. So there are examples of that we can act, we can help advocate on the city's behalf based on, again, intelligence that we collect and analyse ourselves and present through the governances that we've got in place. So we do have some live examples of those.
And it's not quite the same, but it goes to the point that Councillor Vorster makes over and over and over again, and that is that we need to have effectively shovel-ready identified projects so that when the state comes to us and says, okay, we want to generate jobs or we want to generate improvements in the road network, we can go to them and say, here's our list of the top 10 intersections that you can intervene on between Yatala and Coolangatta, and you will make a difference. So yes, if it's evidence that persuades them, great. But in the end, there's always such a lag in the evidence. The data is slow. I don't necessarily think it's all captured. And, you know, whatever it takes to get the cases built to try to make them as compelling as we can, I support.
Thanks, Councillor Caldwell. I'll go to Councillor Tozer, then Baldwin Lumsden. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Young. So the first thing I want to just reiterate Councillor Vorster's view about this idea of volume-driven decision-making. It's a real struggle to balance that when we're arguing with officers, and I think this road safety plan probably acknowledges that to some extent, that, you know, we do need to be aspirational in the improvements that we make to the road network and for pedestrian benefit. And I probably say that in the context of, in my division of 40,000 people, every single high school student goes to 2 precincts, one in Robina and then one in Reedy Creek for the private schools. So All Saints, Robina State High are the 2 primary, you know, high school destinations, or the collection of Reedy Creek-based private schools. They all, or every single high school student pretty much goes to one of those 2 locations for high school. And at the moment, there really isn't much incentive for them to do anything other than get in a car to do so, because we're, you know, there's not enough mechanisms to necessarily cross that state road network. Most of the time, it's a state road network they need to cross. On page 87, there is a number of things that talk about this idea of 3.5 talks about investigate road safety challenges in vulnerable user areas on the Gold Coast to inform the safe routes to school and active school travel programs. Recently, I contacted a council officer to ask about a program that you and I had spoken about, Alton, the idea that the private school bus routes, which mitigate you know, more cars on the road, and these are affluent families, or more affluent families generally, who are sending their kids to private school. All the schools have invested in bus programs, and the bus stops that they utilise are outside the TransLink network, and there isn't a program for us to deliver infrastructure. The most recent response was just this past week, where it was like, look, there isn't a program, it's not on a TransLink route, you know, there's no program suitable. I think it would be a really good initiative for us to come up with a pool of funding that can augment bus stop infrastructure on private school bus route programs outside the TransLink network. Honestly, I think the state should pay for it, or the education department should pay for it. You know, these are school students, they are high school students that are currently jumping in their SUVs either as P-platers or with their mum or dad instead of catching the public bus, because there is actually no place to shelter when it's rainy or, honestly, on the Gold Coast, mostly too sunny. So rain isn't the issue as much as it is a really hot morning. It's in the middle of summer. The last thing we want to do is wait 15 minutes in the sunshine for a bus, or 10 minutes in the sunshine for a bus and get hot and sweaty. These are 14 to 17-year-old young men and women, and honestly, they don't want to be sweaty or wait in the sunshine like that. They don't want to be that. And honestly, if they're boys, they probably don't. We don't want that either. They're stinky if they wait in the sun too long. So bus stop infrastructure, I suppose I wanted to re-emphasise that under that 3.5 action, it would be really good if there isn't another better bus stop infrastructure action on private school bus routes. We must come up with a plan to deliver that. At the moment, your officers don't have the policy framework or funding pool to recommend to our community feedback in a CR to allocate funding to it. In fact, the response from this council officer was almost, it's not supported by officers even from local area works funding. Now, it wasn't explicitly stated like that, but that was the loose program. There isn't a program to support this action, and it needs to. If we're serious about lowering congestion around our schools, and in the case of Division 9, there are only 2 state interchanges at exit 79 and exit 82. All of the traffic infrastructure, volumes go through those 2, and it just creates congestion every single morning because there isn't enough use of public bus infrastructure. So 3.5 needs to incorporate bus stops. The other 2 questions I had relate to actions 3.6. Sorry.
Yeah. I'll just go to, is it all right if Councillor Gates
relevant
got
to
something
that
to say on
content,
that?
yeah.
Just while we're on that, I think we need to show a degree of caution, because when you've been around as long as me, you'll recognise that students at the end of their education move on and they stop catching the bus full stop. So I know there's been a reluctance in the north of the city to install school bus shelters and stops. It's been more of a hail situation because it's a very costly exercise in terms of making them disability compliant, and they change all the time, and kids grow up and they stop getting the bus. And so it's one of those situations where it's a moving feast, if you like, and we have limited funds to spend, so we need to be really cautious about where they're allocated. So I'm not saying it's not relevant what you've said, but I would hate to just see the officers be encouraged to include it without the appropriate level of investigation, because those situations do vary across the city and it's not a bottomless pit.
In response to that, I'm not aware of any schools in our city that have closed for as long as I've been around, 20 years. I don't know any schools that have actually closed. The reality is those schools are 100-year, 200-year pieces of infrastructure. They will always be there, and even when the students graduate, there is another influx of students that come behind them. So,
Councillor, I'm not referring to the schools, I'm referring to the communities where people live and their use of the transport system changes because they grow up and they get a car or they go to work. And so I'm talking about infrastructure in suburbs to get students to and from school at bus stops. And I thought that was the aim of your debate, that you were wanting to see more shelters so that students who wished to get onto the bus system could get the bus and be protected from the sun. I'm simply making the point that suburbs change in time when families grow.
and my response to that is that the schools that are in, or the 11 schools that are in my division or the surrounding area are attracting 5,000 primary school students, and at the moment 3,000 of those primary school students are in a active school travel program. We're changing behaviour in 6 to 12-year-olds such that, and that seems to be a commitment of our council, such that the next 10 years, all of those, if there isn't infrastructure available for those students to attend another location or to accommodate new people moving into the area, because there is a transition of people, we're actually just going to, all the work that we've done at primary school age children is not going to translate into high school age children. So
Through you, Madam Chair.
I don't want to disregard what Councillor Gates is saying. What I am trying to say is that that's not my observation in my area, and I think those schools are going to be there for 100 years. And even though those high school age students do grow up and get their own cars and do their own thing, there's new families that move in all the time because the school infrastructure is not going to change. It's going to be there for 100 years.
Through you, Madam Chair, from what we know, Councillor Tozer, around last time we had a good look, which was a couple of years ago, admittedly, around school transport, is the majority in the city, the majority of students using the school bus network do utilise the TransLink network. Now, what we're talking about in your example is a more marginal position where those private school stops are outside of the TransLink network. Part of the approach that Matt and I have been continuing to take with TransLink is to advocate for expansion of that network. Now, if that network then becomes a public transport service, then the obligation is then on TransLink to uplift, in conjunction with the city, uplift the stop infrastructure. And as we know, if we want more people on public transport, the network has to increase in its size, which is something that we're already advocating. So, you know, I think that is our focus, is to continue to work with TransLink to get that network expanded, and that will already covers most of the school transport.
Yeah, and I get what you're saying. And I'm not even trying to suggest necessarily that the whole of city should provide funding for this pool. It might be a unique problem that is in my division because there are 6 private schools all within a very short couple of kilometres, and that could be just a unique geographical issue that I'm facing. But at the moment, council officers are coming back to me saying that even a traffic engineer or traffic officer is suggesting, well, that investment is not even supported necessarily from a local area works perspective. I'd prefer to be able to have an officer say, look, we can't fund it from whole of city, but we're actually supporting you in your unique local knowledge, deliver a bus stop there. The other 2 I had was relating to 36 and 3.6 and 3.7, and the 3.6 relates to that traffic calming devices policy, ensuring it aligns. I didn't quite catch what the intent of your comments before are. Are we aligning our policy such that traffic calming is likely to be easier to deliver or harder to deliver? In my division, again, with lots of young families, lots of primary schools, lots of childcare centres, and a centralised traffic movement, traffic calming has been very effective, and the noise impacts have frankly been overlooked because cars are actually travelling slower and people feel more safe.
Through you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Councillor Tozer. Like I said before, the intention for this action, this year 1 action of the plan, is to make sure that our policy setting, which we've validated within the last 12 months, as we do with all of our policies, is still fit for purpose. It's a case of is it best practice? Now, the focus there is to make sure that if we do proceed with an LATM scheme, that it's the right type and in the right location and delivered in a timely manner. So it's just to make sure that we are checking out, doing an environmental scan, for want of a better phrase, to make sure that we are investigating all of the more contemporary techniques, not only for the actual overlay, if we do have an overlay, but also the method by which we investigate the applicability of that overlay to that specific geographic location. So it may result in application in certain areas more readily, for example, but it may also say in certain areas the LATM overlay is not best practice, and it might be another intervention that's required to manage the speed environment or the behaviour of vehicles in that particular street.
Okay, so it's definitely a case-by-case approach we're taking. That's good. I think, yeah, my feedback there is that traffic calming works around schools and sporting fields, even when there's trunk infrastructure that is, the roads are designed to move lots of cars in a direction. Around the school, primary school in particular, everyone needs to slow down. The last question I have relates to 3.7318, which is the hinterland actions. One talks about develop and install engineering measures to reduce injury severity at priority hinterland locations, including those susceptible to natural environment hazards. It says that I'm reading here that we're the lead on that. I'm a bit confused by that in that the hinterland is primarily the state road network, and I don't really know what sort of engineering measures we might deliver on the state road network to deal with that as the lead agent. I can't think of a large road that is owned by the council in at least the western hinterland.
Through you, Madam Chair, certainly the lead nature of that is in reference to local roads. We do have a fair few local roads in what you might call the non-urban area, the hinterland area. So certainly would be the lead, just as I've suggested to Councillor Caldwell before, even in areas that are state roads, we can still advocate on behalf of the residents and users of those roads to make sure that the state is aware of emerging safety issues and certainly undertaking best practice in relation to having a forgiving roadside environment, for example, in the state roads. So the states subscribe to the same safe system approach we do. That's the Queensland Road Safety Strategy as well.
Yeah.
They're currently reviewing that. So in the instance that there is a state-controlled road whereas there is a safety issue that we identify, naturally the jurisdictional responsibility would still be on the state to lead any detailed analysis and intervention if that were to be the case.
So when we talk about leading the development and installation of engineering measures, on a hinterland road, what would that look like? What kind of engineering measures on a hinterland road are you talking about?
Thank you, Councillor Tozer, through your own chair. So it can be things like ensuring that the roadside barriers are up to a standard whereby if a car does depart the carriageway,
So like guardrails.
that kind of thing. If the car does depart, it can also be things about establishing a clear zone as well, and just ensuring that the speed environment is appropriate. It might be a bend, it might be advanced warning signage to a curve in the road where the geometry changes dramatically. It might be things of a change of environment whereby you transition from a very rural area, can I say a heavily vegetated area, into an area where there is a land use. It might be a school or something else whereby there's advanced warning on the road and beside the road to make sure drivers are aware of an imminent change in roadside environment. So there's a suite of measures that we would investigate the applicability to based on those factors.
Okay, thank you. Cheers, thanks.
Yeah, just perhaps it could be rural rather than hinterland, because all of those things apply on our rural networks, not just the hinterland.
I've got Councillor Baldwin Lumsden, then I've got Councillor Taylor, then Councillor Vorster.
Thanks, Chair. Through you. Following on from what Councillor Young said about the speed awareness devices, I also agree. I think they're great. The community, for the most part, thinks they're great. They shown to have an effect. What I was curious was about what further data we can get and what ability we have as a city to trial like new technologies or innovation in that space. Had a business contact me late last week. Isn't as pretty as the speed awareness devices. It looks more like the VMS boards, but it essentially shows the speed and also shows up the car's registration plate and said something along the lines of, you're over the speed limit, your plate's been collected. Things like that, I think, might address what our speed awareness devices don't in terms of the high-end speeding. Our speed awareness devices seem really effective for people who are unintentionally over the speed limit, but the people that are actively choosing to be well over the speed limit, that doesn't seem to have the same impact on. We obviously don't get speed cameras put everywhere we'd like. Just curious for what we can do in that space, because often have people particularly affected by the high-end speeding saying hooning constantly, and the speed awareness devices suggest only 5-10% of vehicles are over the speed limit, and the average speed is usually under the signposted speed limit. So I'm curious what can be done in that space.
Through you, Madam Chair, and then I'll go to Matt. I know he's keen to answer as well. Look, we're very aware of all of those devices. In fact, we have, the city has some VMS signs with cameras built in. There are real limits, though, on what we can display, and displaying someone's registration plate may be in contravention of, some of the requirements around privacy. So we do collect data and we do share that with other agencies, so we will continue to do that. I think there is a perception, as you said, Councillor, that hooning is absolutely everywhere, and we know that it is prevalent. We know that when we have applied the speed awareness devices, it has seen a reduction in speeding activity, so we'll continue to deploy that. As I said earlier, what we can take advantage of is new technology which allows wider field of view, so we are restricted in where we can put the current devices. So by embracing that new technology, we can put it in more locations. I'm not sure if you want to add anything in terms of the applicability of the information collected, Matt, but there are limits around what we can do, but it has proven to be effective.
Thanks, Alan. Through Madam Chair. Thank you, Councillor Baldwin Lumsden. So, at the time of procurement of the speed awareness devices, that is best on ground. They are the best in terms of the data that it collects. That was one of a key criteria of our procurement of those, as it was for Brisbane, Logan, many other LGAs, in particularly SCQ and beyond. As Elton alluded to in a previous answer and just now, we are looking at the asset management of those devices as to when we don't need to replace them. They're working fantastically well. Error rates are very, very low. At a time when we do want to trial new technology, an intelligence-driven approach will be criteria number one again, to make sure that we, not only does it advise the community of their responsibilities around speed management, but also it gives us a whole lot of intelligence to provide to the police. We're not going to blend the city's responsibilities with the police in terms of enforcement. That was always a very clear delineation of responsibility back when we first did this, to a point where we had to speak with the police about ensuring their timing, their tactical deployment of speed cameras and whatnot that weren't that neither device was interfering with each other. Can I say it that way? So there wasn't an inadvertent interference. Now, what we do is provide the very granular data from the speed awareness devices to our QPS colleagues. What we do for yourselves is aggregate it to a point where hopefully it's consumable and it's meaningful and whatnot for you. But I think what we're doing at the moment is the right thing in terms of giving the data, the granular data to both. We share some with the department as well when it's meaningful for them. The outliers, as you allude to, the very high, if there is a collective now of those people doing that. If there's a group of people speeding at very high levels, then it's fair to say you'll see a pretty immediate QPS response to that, because that's a pattern of behaviour. That's not just a one-off user. What we have seen, as Elton alludes to through the data, is that these devices have worked fantastically well in making sure that the vast majority of users of the system are aware of their speed and correct their behaviour if they need to. On the basis of that, we're seeing more of these at things like construction zones now. They're not the same similar devices, but they are very effective in making sure that we lower the speed environment around work zones as well. And that's not just on the M1, you see a lot of them at the moment, but on a lot of our work zones as well. It's something we've implemented through our workplace health and safety practices on the very great suggestion of our construction workforce as well. So they're very effective. They do a great job. They're very well regarded by the community, as you refer to. We are constantly looking for improvements to the system, though, and I think that goes across the board with a lot of our technology and a lot of our intervention tools. So we'll keep doing that, and I think during this life cycle of this plan, I think I'd be surprised if we didn't trial some new technology across a variety of road safety opportunities.
And can I just remind councillors of the action from the last committee meeting raised by Councillor Owen Jones, that we are writing to the state to look at those new speed devices that they're implementing outside of schools. And I think you've also written to the state for 2 in your division. So, these are technologies which we're embracing, which do work.
Again, Councillor, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Just following on, one last question is if we could potentially be provided some of the more detailed data might be helpful at times. As I said, most of the community is very receptive to the speed awareness devices. The people I seem to find are most sceptical of their efficacy are the ones on the higher order roads that seem to believe they're impacted by hooning on a regular basis. The most recent query I've kind of had was the data suggested it was about 35% of the vehicles on that particular road at that time were over the speed limit on approach, but the average approaching vehicle speed was, I think it was more than 10 kilometres an hour under the speed limit. So the scepticism's, well, there's a lot of people doing well over the speed limit, and then there's a lot of grandma drivers doing 20, 30 under the speed limit. Grandma, I'm quoting the community, that's not my wording.
Yeah.
I'm representing the community in Division 7. So that's some of the feedback I've been getting, is there's a lot of people doing well and truly under the speed limit that's almost skewing or biasing the data. Like, how can we have almost a third of people over the speed limit, but then the average speed be 25% under the speed limit? So I think if there could be a more detailed breakdown, might be
certainly through you, Madam
helpful.
Chair. Councillor, absolutely. And the data, like I said, we've tried to find the right pitch, if you like, of the data that we do aggregate and provide. If you like, I can provide you the detailed spreadsheet, and what we can do. is provide a happy medium somewhere about level of detail, but not too much detail. What I can say to all of the councillors, look, we're there to provide you with the information that helps you communicate with your community. So is there something that you see in the data that we summarise for you that you'd like more information about? Please just sing out, and we can drill down and get that for you if you've got any inquiries.
So I'm going to go to Councillor Taylor, then Councillor Vorster, and then I'm going to go to Councillor Owen-Jones to move, and I think everyone's had a healthy amount of input into this particular item, and I'll get Councillor Owen-Jones is going to move, and I'll second, and we'll move on. Thank you.
Thank you, and through the chair to the director or Matt. The main road between Broadbeach and Southport Bridge is a main thoroughfare, and I think I'm talking along in relation to what Councillor Corder was talking about. These main thoroughfares should be a increased speed so we keep the flow moving, and it's always been a frustration between Broadbeach and Southport, the speed getting through there and how long it takes, and the ability to actually increase those levels through that particular area. We've got a case recently where we've done new works and we've actually reduced it back down to 60. So for me, what can we do to actually make sure that the roads that we've got, that we can increase the speeds through those particular areas? Naturally, when it's quiet through those periods, it's easy to get through, and naturally the road system takes care of itself in relation to reducing the speed because of traffic itself. But that's a particular stretch that, in my view, we've got Broadbeach to Southport. Yes, we've got some light rail challenges through there that we can increase the speed, but recently, as I said, it actually did decrease through that main beach section.
Through you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Councillor Taylor. So there are a myriad of factors that the Speed Management Advisory Committee look at when setting, reviewing, changing speed limits. Jurisdictional responsibility is not necessarily one of them, although it is reflected usually through the function of the road. Now, a more key criteria, if you like, is the actual road environment. And I know the section of road you refer to there does have a lot of side friction, can I say, in areas. It does have a lot of intersections where you don't want vehicles accelerating dramatically to reach a 85th percentile speed, which may or may not exceed the posted speed limit, to then have to heavily decelerate upon approach to an intersection. So there is the approach is one of, can we set the speed limit to a level that is likely to be realistically applied by the vast majority of road users on the basis of the environment that I'm travelling through and past. So there is an engineering science to setting speed limits and reviewing speed limits. And in relation to Councillor Caldwell's comment before, in some cases the speed limit review, they do increase. That is an outcome. It's not I'd say there's more likelihood that the review is undertaken to reduce the speed limit, but in some cases where there's a change of function or form or whatever, it might be a change, it might be the application of a limited access road by the department, whereby because there is a reduction in side friction, which is one a key criteria, vehicles entering or exiting the main flow of traffic at a low speed, and then the derived speed differential, if I can say that. So what you don't want is some vehicles travelling at a certain speed and other vehicles travelling at speed X times by 2. So what you're trying to do is normalise the speed environment to a point where there is uniformity in use of that road corridor. So there is a pretty detailed science that the guys apply, who are subject matter experts in this space. So certainly, and I know in relation to the Sundale project, that was a process undertaken as part of that project as well. So hence the reason for the change.
Councillor Vorster.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just wanted to weigh in very briefly on the discussion that was had with or between Councillor Toes and Councillor Gates. To the best of my understanding, both state and independent schools will seek to have their schools developed with a ministerial infrastructure designation, which is an instrument under the Planning Act, as I understand, that effectively allows the state to manage that process rather than affording council the opportunity to intervene and add conditions which may better integrate that asset, whether it's a police station, an ambulance dispatch centre or a school, into the surrounding community. It's one of the reasons why I didn't support the process around the Southern Satellite Hospital, for example. But just having a look at some of the ministerial infrastructure designation notices that are currently live, what's really interesting is that when the minister issues this notice and invites community feedback, there's this boilerplate section that says requirements included in the infrastructure designation. And I'm not going to read them all, but it does contain these elements: active transport, car parking, and school transport management. I just wonder whether, as a council, we should set out some minimum standards for what we expect independent schools and state schools to feature as part of their redevelopment plans, particularly when they're creating more capacity on premises, and that those conditions almost form a standard submission that council makes every time there is a school that progresses through this ministerial infrastructure designation process. And at least that puts the onus on the state government to respond to us about why they have not provided one car park per staff member, or why they've not provided a sheltered bus stop or queuing area for students. So while it's not our responsibility and the state removes the assessment from us, if we've got these minimum standards and we're making a submission every time, then at least we can defensively go back to the community and say, actually, we lobbied for this and, your state government didn't come through, whoever may be in power at the time. So I just wanted to flag that as a way of maybe putting a bit of pressure on the state every time.
Thanks, Councillor Vorster, for that. I think that's been a healthy debate on that item this morning. I'm happy for Councillor Owen-Jones to move it. Sue, Sandy, I'm happy to second it. Councillors will put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried. You right with that, Sandy? All right, councillors, we'll go on to, the Mayor is now no longer able to attend this morning, so we'll just follow the agenda as set out. So we'll go to item 6.3, being the Robina Central Planning and Transport Study. I believe Councillor Vorster has a changed recommendation or a recommendation, but I'll go to you first.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I certainly don't require a presentation myself, having been engaged with city officers during this process, but following a discussion I had with the director, and having provided the director with a copy of this changed recommendation, I'll propose moving it, and if I have the support of a seconder, would like to talk to it to provide the community a bit of context around how we've arrived at this point and how we're going to tackle this important transport issue. Yeah, and I'm happy to read it for the benefit of those tuning in. Sorry? Oh, well, I think Councillor Young's jumped in there, but up to you. Up to her, I guess. Well, what I might do is I'll start reading it while the formatting's being done, because I have a copy on my screen. So it reads, A, that Council note the Robina Town Centre Drive and Laver Drive intersection project, the project, is important to the transport network, underpins modelling in nearby development applications and is of significant community interest. B, that Council note it was advised that the project would be delivered in 2021-22 during successive budget deliberations and most recently at the time the City Budget 21-22 was adopted. The Council note the State Government has since announced its intention to deliver a satellite athletes village in Robina for the Brisbane 2032 Olympic Games on land owned by its investment vehicle, QIC Limited. D, in light of the above, together with the established urgent need for the project, that the project be rescoped and redesigned with a view to commencing substantial construction no later than in 2022-23. That in the meantime, this is E, tactical pedestrian safety and active travel projects be progressed on Robina Town Centre Drive and Laver Drive. F, that council note the interplay of the nearby intersections on traffic outcomes, that the Robina Town Centre Gateway study be undertaken to coordinate future upgrades and to inform the development of LGIP 2 and its successors, with a subordinate part, that the Robina Town Centre Gateway study include an assessment of alternate configurations for the intersection at Robina Station Road and Laver Drive. G, that the Economy, Planning and Environment Directorate be informed of the outcomes of the Robina Town Centre Gateway study and any updates to better inform development application decisions in the Robina Central Planning Area. H, that a communication plan, including a dedicated web page, be developed in consultation with the Divisional Councillor to update the community on this project, the development of the Robina Town Centre Gateway study and the Central Gold Coast East-West Passenger study, and I, that an update be provided during deliberations on the City Budget 22-23. So happy to talk to that if there are questions.
Last question. When you say a dedicated web page, do you just mean a page on the council website?
Yeah, thank you very much. Through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Caldwell. When you look at the issues that have been touched on in the report, you'll see that there will be and there is significant community confusion around the timing of these projects and the work that council's undertaking. If you have a look at many park upgrade projects, for example, around the city, we normally create a web page on council's website that acts as a single point of truth.
Sorry, that's what I mean. Maybe I'm not getting my technical speak.
So it's just
I just mean like so that you can cut the link and send it to a resident and say,
this is what we're doing.
In relation to the questions you've asked about the traffic, here's the single link to the page.
The single point of truth.
Right, okay.
So that there's no confusion, and then city officers can update that as circumstances change.
And then the second question was just in relation to paragraph E about the tactical pedestrian something or others.
Yes.
Are they like existing projects or something, or what exactly is that?
Yes, so there are pedestrian elements of the former design that city officers can notionally get on with. It really deals with the fact that we have about, I think, 600 unregulated pedestrian movements across a roundabout that carries 30,800 vehicle movements daily, although those figures I may not be recalling correctly. So you've got vulnerable road users from the hospital, the high school, the allied health precinct, the mental health wards, all of that trying to get across the road in a very uncontrolled way. City officers have identified some quick wins to address those pedestrian conflict issues before needing to get on with the vehicular aspect of the intersection.
Okay. And so, sorry, then just one more thing. Why are we not just doing the intersection upgrade? Am I missing something critical there? If it was in the budget this year, it should be happening.
So, Councillor Caldwell, it was due to happen. When the announcement came out of the Olympic Games Village, it forced us to go back and see whether that intersection would cope with its redesign, and quite frankly, it wouldn't. It's a very difficult intersection. One leg of the intersection is on structure above the Queensland Rail Corridor. It's tightly constrained in its existing geometry, so we had maxed out that intersection design that we had proposed to its ultimate capacity without significant further redesign. Then when we find out there's going to be this Games Village and associated other development, we would have spent ratepayers' money doing something which we'd have to go back and redesign. So we decided it would be a better decision to stop it now, redesign it to its capacity that will cater for that additional development, instead of having to go back and do the whole job again.
So how much have we spent to date? Like if we're getting it to a point where it's been designed and was shovel ready, like we're just going to burn all of that cash?
Through you, Madam Chair, not all of it, no. So there's a lot of aspects to it, such as the pedestrian crossings that Councillor Vorster has referred to that we can get on with. A lot of the information we found out doing that design will be used in the redesign.
Because mentioned to the CEO recently to try to keep a track of what the actual Olympic Games cost implications are. And so to me, we actually should be keeping a track of if there is a increase in cost or an increase in scope and a loss of work that's been done as a result of the Olympics Village going in Robina, we need to capture that, because it's actually not fair on ratepayers that we shuffle it through as being business as usual growth when it's actually games related. It's not to say that it's not something that we will end up doing, but we've got to be understanding what the real implications are and then being able to make proper funding decisions to get that work done. Because I'm expecting that if you're talking about a suspended slab bridge thing over the rail corridor being expanded, that the price of this project is going to go through the roof as a result of those changes. If we're that far out of capacity on the current configuration, then the price is going to go up. And what you're saying is that's a direct result of the Olympics. And that's then becomes a budget decision next year in 22, 23, or whatever it is, as to whether we proceed.
Through you, Madam Chair, there's absolutely no argument with the idea of keeping a track of this additional expenditure which has been caused by things like this. So we certainly intend to do that. It is our intention to try and restrain the costs on this as much as we possibly can, including that bridge over the rail corridor, which is a constraint that we're already working with the design team. We don't want to be in a position where we've got to add significant additional expense to that. So we think at this stage that we might be able to get away with it, but it's something we are still working on. The other thing to note in this context, as Councillor Vorster is aware, we've been tracking the background congestion in the Robina Town Centre over the past 12 to 18 months, and it has significantly increased in that time. We are seeing quite unusual things occurring in that sector, which is outside of the normal AM and PM peak. So even on weekends at 11 o'clock on a Saturday, you'd be hard pressed to get through those intersections easily. They are pretty well at capacity, and what we're finding is people who are coming off the Robina Parkway Labour Drive intersection are actually shooting north to go through this intersection to avoid that congestion. So we're starting to see this synergy of congestion occurring as a result of normal background together with anticipated growth, which is severely going to impact on this particular intersection. But we know it's going to have a knock-on effect because, as the report notes, there are 4 intersections which work in conjunction with each other to deal with traffic through this tightly constrained part of the network. And part of that constraint, as Matt will add to in a moment, is really due to the M1 and its uplifted capacity, and people are getting to and from the M1 in a very, very short geographical space. Do you want to add to that, Matt?
Thanks, through you, Madam Chair. The only thing I'd add, these roundabouts work as a system. Now, what we see with roundabouts that reach end of life is that as soon as there is a dramatic imbalance of flow, then the roundabouts don't perform the function that they were designed to originally perform. Now, in this instance, these 4 roundabouts perform as a system, so we need to have a look at the performance of these other locations on the basis of making sure that we don't commit all of our resources to one intersection, that we may be able to spread our resources across the 4 intersections or some of the 4 intersections to make sure that we can attempt to manage the flow of traffic through this particular system. So that will be part of the contemplation in the planning study.
I'll go to Councillor Gates next, and then Councillor Peter Young, and then back to Councillor Vorster, unless your questions are...
No, my question just relates to how much is in the budget at the moment. And, I mean, I always think it's important that we've got estimates of cost before we blindly put our hand in the air about a whole range of things that may impact on competing projects or whatever. And quite clearly it was not the intent of the officers when they presented this report to have such a whopping big recommendation that we haven't had time to kind of absorb. So I'm not saying it's not possible. I don't even know that the state has absolutely committed. I think we're a bit premature with this.
All right. Madam Chair, if I could respond to that. Here's the reality. This intersection forms part of a statutory planning instrument, our local government infrastructure plan, and for the last 5 years, as a council, we have voted to progress this project. And this council has voted to support things like a 2,000 student TAFE, a Metricon Homes head office, the breakwater development. It has voted to bring in and induce a massive surge in commercial and residential traffic, right, on the basis that this intersection, which is fully funded, I think it's $5.9 million over these 5 years, fully funded. It has made a commitment to the community, it's made a commitment to those motorists, and it's made a commitment when supporting development applications to get this thing done.
I get that. And I supported it.
Yeah, so the issue that I have is that 2 weeks before we were supposed to commence construction or issue the community communications piece on this, I get informed by city officers that, oh, sorry, councillor, and this is just weeks after budget, I get told, oh, sorry, councillor, this project is not proceeding. After, as a council, we've gone out and told the community that this will be a feature of this financial year. What then really concerned me is that the fact that this project was not proceeding hadn't filtered on to the Environment Planning and Economy Directorate, which was then making assumptions around delivery of this intersection when supporting development applications in the area. If you, and I appreciate that you haven't had time to read this, Councillor Gates, but I can't direct a city officer to change a recommendation in a report before it lands here. But if you do spend a few minutes stepping through it, what you will see is that I'm doing nothing other than asking city officers to take the funding that we've already set aside for this project and use it to get the design right in response to what may unfold at the Athletes Village, right? So I'm not asking for any extra money. I'm just asking them to redo the design so that we can get on with the job.
And is there certainty around the Athletes Village? What level of certainty do we have on that?
Through you, Madam Chair. Look, we're as certain as we can be, Councillor Gates. It's been announced publicly. As far as we're aware of all of the discussions, that is something which is actually going to occur on that site. We did our own investigations looking at that to see whether there was any possibility that it might move, and we're not aware of any such possibility.
And Madam Chair, if I could just continue on that. What's really important, and regrettably it's confidential, so I can't talk specifically to it, but if you look at Part F, right, you will find that many of these intersections are already flagged in LGIP, right? Already flagged in LGIP. And all F proposes to do, which is not to introduce any new projects, all F proposes to do is to coordinate future upgrades, because it wouldn't make sense proceeding with intersections A, B, C and D if going A, D, C, B is, number one, cheaper and can actually mitigate traffic impacts better, and potentially doing A and D would allow us to delay the need for B and C. So this isn't council blindly signing up to spend any more money than it would otherwise spend. What I'm seeking to do is to make sure that when we do spend money, which we have to do in order to meet our desired service standards, that those projects are properly sequenced so that we reduce the impact on the road network and reduce the cost of delivery. And I might just point to FA, for example. That may completely mitigate the need to pursue one of the roundabout upgrades completely by foregoing a roundabout and installing a median and ensuring that people turn left and out. So I'm not asking for more money, I'm just asking us to spend a bit more. And just to give you some more comfort, Councillor Gates, the last item, which I've got as eye on mine, but it's 10 on the screen.
Yep.
It says that it needs to come to budget.
Right, but I think it needs to go to the state. If it's actually valid that all of this work needs to change, aside from what has been allocated and planned, due to the state's decision to construct the Athletes Village at this location, then why aren't the state paying the money? I mean, they've chosen a location where obviously there are going to be transportation difficulties. So why does the poor old ratepayer have to stump up?
Madam Chair, as I said, we have an obligation to deliver this project already. We've told the community that we would be delivering this project already. All I'm merely doing, and I'm not even labouring under the assumption that there will be any extra cost, given that we've committed to this project over the last 4 to 5 years, what I'm merely saying is that supporting the city officers is that if we're going to spend that money, which we signed up to spend, that we get the best design to respond to the reality of the state's decision. To me, if there's extra cost, then absolutely. I'm saying let's put the state on the burner. But it's already a live LGIP project, and all I'm merely saying is let's get the design right. And to say that we shouldn't proceed with this project when it should have been done 5 years ago.
Yeah, look, you'll see lots of projects in the course of your career that are planned. I mean, I had a letterbox drop about a bridge going in at Coomera years ago, and the work was to start the next week, and it never eventuated because the state then said we couldn't touch the mangroves. So there's often times when things change from what is budgeted because situations change. And my only point, I don't deny the work probably needs doing, and this is probably the most sensible way. I just think the state should be asked to pay for it.
Madam Chair, through you to you, Councillor Gates, we certainly will be pursuing the state for contributions to this one, particularly because we can show that pretty direct relationship to this additional infrastructure. So it's certainly I know that this is being streamed live, and hello to everyone in the state who's listening, but we will be pursuing it.
Well, I'm glad, because the point is, if I understand it correctly, if it weren't for the Athletes Village, we'd be proceeding with our budgeted allocation and the work would be commencing.
I think this is important to acknowledge, and Director, correct me if I'm wrong. We could proceed with the intersection which we're morally obliged to deliver because it's part of our statutory LGIP project and has underpinned Council's decision to put thousands of people in and around this roundabout. We could proceed with that today, right? We could do it, and the intersection would deliver extra capacity and life would be good. But the state government have said that they intend delivering an Athletes Village down the road, and because of that, we would end up with a far shorter useful life for the project. All we're proposing to do is to tweak the design, rescope it, tweak the design, which may mean no additional cost. We're not there, but it could mean no additional cost, so that we get extra life out of that intersection. And to say that this needs to be put on the back burner because the state pops up, I've got a problem with, because every road project that happens to fall in the light rail corridor should also be stopped, because the state's inducing...
I never suggested stopping anything, Councillor. I just asked for some figures and for some assurance that the state would be asked to step up to contribute funding if it's necessary to do 4 or 5 roundabouts, as I've heard this morning. I'm not trying to be difficult, or I just think it's fair when it's ratepayers' dollars and it's as a consequence of a state decision that we need to cover our bases.
Through you, Madam Chair, if you don't mind. Thank you, Councillor Gates and Councillor Vorster. Can I give you assurance? Last week, we've already flagged this with our counterparts in the state that we're going to do this piece of work, and we're going to do it in a way like we do. There's about half a dozen other major projects in the city at the moment where we design our concept and business case process so it can be formally considered by the state government as part of their investment process as well. So they're aware of that. They're supportive of us doing that approach to
Great.
make sure that we align our contemplation of investment with the state investment arm as well.
Thank you. Thanks.
Councillor Young?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, my concern is that this report was presented to us for information, and all of a sudden it seems we're identifying the number one priority project for road infrastructure in the next decade, and seemingly asked to commit funds to it that weren't anticipated. And I understand the reasons for bringing it to our attention, but I am a bit concerned about some of the wording here that implies the importance of this project in a competing environment, that this one would be situated above many other projects that have been likewise waiting and gestating. So, for example, we've got wording like the established urgent need for the project is not backed necessarily by science, it's opinion.
No, it's not. Sorry, Madam Chair, if I could just really clarify this point.
I think I've got the floor, unless you want to have interjections. And so I question the director as to why he's supporting this motion if the report before us is identifying scoped works within the 10-year horizon, as we've got across the city, and all of a sudden, because of a change, including the potential athletes' village, this has become an urgent project.
Through you, Madam Chair, thank you for the question, Councillor Young. So my perspective on this is that there is an established need because it was part of the approved budget process. The urgency relates to the window of opportunity we have before us, as Councillor Vorster says, to utilise the existing funding to crack on with the redesign. So we can do that now because that funding is currently available in the financial year. So hence the urgency, rather than deleting the project and bringing it back before you through some special budget committee. The urgency also relates, as I mentioned earlier, to the growing traffic congestion in the network in this part of the city, which is a fact now, and it's only getting worse. So we know how long these things do take to gestate and get through the process. So we've got a live, growing traffic congestion issue. We've got a major facility being established in the not too distant future that we need to be catering for. So, I'm comfortable myself with the sense of urgency, but predominantly to utilise the existing funding which is available this current financial year.
Thank you.
That's my take on it, Councillor.
I'll go back to Councillor Vorster, and then I'll go to Councillor Patterson and Councillor Owen-Jones.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Look, I find it difficult to stomach the fact that I've got to fight so hard to get council to support a project which just a few weeks it supported unanimously when the budget was adopted. I find it difficult to swallow. I also find it difficult to swallow because I think generally this is seen as a Robina project, when in actual fact Robina, sitting at the geographic heart of the Gold Coast, shoulders a lot of the traffic burden that comes with the growth of the Gold Coast generally. And if you live in Broadbeach, for example, you might cut across Nielsen's Road, but if you live in Burleigh, for example, you might come through these two exits to eventually make your way east. And so while they are roundabouts around Robina Town Centre, the reality is that many Gold Coasters in the central southern part of the city are affected by them. It's urgent because we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people walking across 4 lanes of traffic that has in excess of 30,000 vehicles progressing through it with no safe way of getting through. It's urgent because This project should have been done years ago. The business case said it should have been done years ago, and the community are making decisions around investment based on the fact that we committed at budget time to getting this thing done this financial year. It's urgent because council voted to support the breakwater development. It's urgent because council supported a 2,000 student TAFE on that intersection. It's urgent because the city is growing and this needed to be done 5 years ago. And it's urgent because the timeline has already slipped. It's already slipped. Progressing this project isn't coming at the cost of other projects, through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Young, because we already committed to delivering it in the local government infrastructure plan, and we've already committed to funding it as recent as the last budget. I'm not here to take money out of any other division. I'm here to get an intersection upgraded that we've already committed to upgrading. And I just want to highlight this point. The check and balance comes in at the last part of this resolution, which refers the update to the city budget deliberation process, which is our opportunity to assess competing priorities collectively, not just at committee, but all councillors sitting around a table. If we don't progress this project, it will be deeply embarrassing to this council because we made a commitment to the community that it would have been progressed. I think it will prejudice our ability to attract state funding because we won't have a shovel-ready project, and Councillor Caldwell talked to the need of that earlier. And if you're a councillor who has a community that sits on the eastern seaboard, this is critically important to you as well, because at some point your residents will cut east-west through this corridor. Anyway, I just wanted to underscore that's the reason I believe it's so urgent, and I'm not here to cheat any councillor out of funds that might otherwise go to their electorates, because we've already voted to allocate funding toward this project, and I'm making it very clear as the punctuation of my resolution that any further spending is a matter for this council during our budget deliberations. I'm not asking for a blank cheque. I'm just trying to save us from embarrassment.
Thank you, Councillor Vorster. Were you finished, Councillor Young? Was there anything else? You were finished?
Yes, I would like to respond to that, but I did finish.
Okay,
Thanks. Look, I'm not interested in opposing a project that's already been endorsed by council and it's within the budget. The issue is that this project is to be rescoped and redesigned and expanded and extended. And sure, that may mean there's some further opportunity for council to review the budget implications, and that will be critical because ultimately over time other things will become the most urgent, and they will have an impact. This will have an impact on the delivery of those other projects. So it's a matter of ensuring we're applying the same standard across the city in terms of our network performance and our investment in achieving the right outcomes. And if funds are there for a project, I'm not standing in the way of it.
thanks, Councillor Young. I'll go to Councillor Patterson and then Councillor Owen-Jones.
Thank you. I don't see a huge amount of difference, actually, between Councillor Vorster's and the conclusions that the officers made. So with regard to the rescope and capacity, this report, the conclusion, which we would be noting, states that we will rescope and that the upgrade project will be rescoped and capacity upgraded. So that part is that part's not different. Councillor Vorster is aligned with what the council officers are saying. The part that I would like to see, and possibly with an addition to this recommendation, is I don't think that this language is tight enough in terms of really separating the costs to the state government. And in fact, I think possibly that the director's wording and the conclusion might have even been stronger than this one, by saying very specifically that it will be rescoped and capacity upgraded to respond to growth, including the development of the Olympic Games Village precinct. So given this was Councillor Caldwell's point, he might assist me with some suggested wording if Councillor Vorster's happy with it, as well as that an update be provided during deliberations on the city budget. I think that there should be a specific request once we identify what that cost is to the state government. And that, because Councillor Vorster, my understanding, the big kind of difference here between what you're saying and the directors is with a view to commencing substantial construction no later than 22-23. Is that, I mean, you're both saying that it needs to be rescoped and redone, right? So I think for me, for comfort, I totally agree that we need to have the state government holding it, and saying that you're in negotiations with them doesn't really give me a lot of comfort, given my experience of negotiations with other projects. I think we need to be able to, there needs to be something, I just can't think of the wording, and maybe someone else can help me, that an update be provided during deliberations of the city budget with specific budget difference, which is dependent or created by the state government requirements. So that we go, okay, we will allocate this in the budget, state government, you need to cough up this. That's my thoughts.
I might go to Councillor Owen Jones, just to see if he's got any feedback on that.
I had some thoughts in terms of words, which I just sent a copy of my handwriting over to Councillor Vorster, so I'm not too sure if he can actually read it. But yeah. I was going to suggest in 4, and I'll just say it out loud before you change it, Sandy, that be maybe worked around a little bit, so it would be something like, in light of the above, together with the established urgent need for the project, that the project be rescoped and redesigned with a view to negotiating with the state for funding, or for a funding investment, so that the construction may occur in a timely manner or as quickly as possible, or something along those lines. Now, I'm not trying to get in the way of your motion, Councillor Vorster. I suppose I'm just trying to say, how do we get to the point of writing to the state saying we think that there might be a dollar difference, largely because of the Games Village? How can we get that resolved as quickly as possible so that we can get on with the result?
So, Madam Chair, if I can respond to that with your leave, thank you. I hate what I perceive, and this is because this is so important to me, any suggestion, or if there's an air in here that I want to let the state government off the hook with infrastructure funding in Robina. No. I've made a point for the last 5 years of my time in council to unscramble the egg of the related legislation and to put a blowtorch on these people, right? Because QIC own all of this developable land, including the Robina Town Centre, and they cause havoc on our local roads. And I like to think that there's never been a councillor as strong on the point of state government funding than me. My concern, to your point directly, Councillor Owen Jones, to your suggested wording, is that we already have a need to deliver this specific upgrade. The fact that this intersection is not already under construction, quite frankly, I see as an embarrassment, right? It's an embarrassment for me that this intersection is not already under construction. The case to get on with this intersection upgrade is, and sorry, it's not a personal political embarrassment, it's the fact that we endorsed a budget and we talked about it.
I don't think it should be delayed.
So my concern, Councillor Owen Jones, is that if we tie progressing this upgrade to our dealings with the state government, we may be in a position where we're failing to meet our commitment under the LGIP to deliver it. If I can riff on what you're suggesting, to the extent that the balance intersections may need to be reprioritised in the LGIP because of the Athletes Village, 100%, I think we should be telling the state government that they need to be paying, right? So if there are 4 intersections, what I would like to do is to have the opportunity for city officers to show us that they can take the funding that's already there and make it work for the Rocket intersection upgrade, but then to give councillors the comfort, maybe perhaps through additional wording, that if the balance intersections need to be retimed in the draft LGIP that we've already received because of the Athletes Village, then that needs to be the subject of our negotiations with the state, and that the state need to be on the hook for funding. Anyway, I certainly don't have a monopoly on good ideas. I'm certainly passionate about it. But Madam Chair, through you to Councillor Owen-Jones, if he can work with that in some suggested wording, I'd love to take his guidance and counsel.
Back to you, Councillor Owen-Jones.
I'm happy to go along with what we're trying to achieve. Like, I mean, I think we're almost in furious agreement, right? So, and it's not about divisional patches or anything like that. Like, I mean, but what I've heard today, in my view, is that we're rescoping something because of a satellite village that was never imagined when it was originally scoped, but doesn't necessarily remove the fact that it needs to be fixed. We just want to make sure that when we fix it right, rather than half fix it. The new variable that's happened since the budget announcement as such is the fact that the state are going to wander in and build density, probably in a timeline that we weren't necessarily imagining, you know? So we want to make sure that if we can leverage that and get some of that investment, we do. The challenge that I have is that it is 2032, you know, which doesn't help deliver the outcome now, but sometime in the next 10 years, they're going to be building built product there. So let's say that's in 8 years' time. You know, we are probably a couple of years away from the state actually wanting to commit capital to these type of projects. How do we skim through all that? I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm just saying that to me there's a timeline, and we want to make sure that if we're spending money fixing a problem that we have now, that's not wasted money. And I think that's what we all agree on.
So, Madam Chair, I thank Councillor Owen-Jones for translating fiery Italian debate.
I thought it was Kiwi debate, actually. Like, I mean, pick your nationality. Don't swear at me in Afrikaans.
I won't, although it's best swear words, though, in that particular language. So perhaps in 4, with your leave, Madam Chair, let's remove together with the established urgent need of the project. Let's remove that altogether. So it simply reads, in light of the above, that the project be rescoped rescoped and redesigned in accordance with the report, with a view to delivering the project as reasonably and practically as possible. Oh, yeah, sorry, as soon as reasonably and practically possible. And then we just put a full stop. Delete the balance of that, thanks Sandy. And then if we could scroll down right to the end. That an update be provided during deliberation city budget, and if we could just add a 10. Yep. That a separate report be brought forward outlining the infrastructure issues. I just have one more question. Okay. outlining the infrastructure issues of the Brisbane 2032 Olympic Games. Across the Gold Coast. To inform the preparation of an advocacy program with the state and Commonwealth governments. Yes, infrastructure issues and related costs.
After issues and related costs.
Yeah. And hopefully for Councillor Gates and Councillor Young, what this demonstrates is that there are going to be infrastructure issues right across the Gold Coast, not just in Robina, and perhaps to look at Olympic issues solely in the subject in the area of Robina is a bit unfair, and that it would make sense for us to look at how the city would be impacted by the games from Yatala to Coolangatta, to use Councillor Caldwell's line, and that the city officers get on with that shopping list. Because I just note yesterday, I think Ted O'Brien was nominated as the federal government's delegate to this Olympic Committee. I'm sure the state are making movements. And the reason why I think it's so urgent is because I don't want us to miss the opportunity for state and federal funding. And I think we risk it if we don't have shovel-ready projects. So while the majority of this recommendation deals with trying to fix up the Rocket intersection, hopefully with the addition of 10, councillors can see that I'm not trying to be parochial, and there will be an opportunity for us to agree on a wish list for the city so that we can, on the merits of individual projects, go cap in hand to the state and Commonwealth for their fair share of infrastructure funding.
Thanks, Councillor Walsh. I'll go to Councillor Gates for her final question.
Thank you. I simply had the one query really all the way through, and it was regarding certainty on the block of land. So my question to the director is, if the state decides not to utilise the block of land that has so far been mentioned at Robina, would we be able to move ahead with what's already budgeted, or would the intersection still require upgrading? Or is it entirely related to the parcel of land that's been identified by the state for the proposed athletes' village that causes the work?
Through you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Councillor Gates. I think Elton alluded to before, it is a big influence here is an assumption about the use of that piece of land, but we need to relook at this intersection as part of that system with at least the other 3 intersections identified on page 109 of the report, because of the change and significant growth, if you like, in some of that non-traditional demand, the off-peak demand in Robina anyway.
So it's possible that the original designs done for the $5.9 million project that has been endorsed by the council would require review anyway.
Through Madam Chair, that's correct, Councillor Gates, on the basis of, thankfully, our gateway process captured this, as I've spoken to Councillor Walsh about, reasonably late in the process, but it's great that our gateway process caught this before we moved into a construction phase.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, any other questions, Councillor? Did you want to speak any more to that, Councillor Walsh?
Yeah, I need to leave it on a nicer tone. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not sure who seconded the motion. Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate that sincerely. Look, councillors, I think we all know that we're supportive of development and projects that add to our city, but they do carry costs. And as Councillor Gates alluded to, quite often those costs fall to the ratepayer. despite the fact that the state government and the federal government may have a moral obligation to do their heavy lifting. I mean, the Robina Town Centre itself, it's owned by QIC, which is ultimately owned by the Queensland government, and they do their fair share of inducing traffic for commercial return into the precinct. But I haven't, in my time as councillor for 5 years, seen them reinvest some of that commercial return into the road network. And it becomes galling to me when you've got a state government Pacific motorway running next to a state government owned shopping centre, when the poor ratepayer is up for the cost of making sure that the whole city's transport network doesn't grind to a halt because of the narrow road reserve that we have between the two state government owned properties. It's galling to me. So over the last 5 years, I've attempted to get this council into a position where we're actively lobbying for reform so that those developments make an infrastructure contribution. But one of the things I have learnt is that the growth of the city doesn't impact just the areas where that growth happens to be unfolding. And ultimately, people need to access services right across the Gold Coast. They might need to travel into Southport, they might need to come into Robina, to Broadbeach or Surfers Paradise. And ultimately, even though a project is in the Robina Central Planning Area, it doesn't mean that it's not a legitimate trunk project that benefits the whole of the city. So today, yeah, I spoke passionately, and yeah, I did get over the top, I'm sure, arguing for a project that happens to be in Robina, happens to be in that Robina Central Planning Area. But I'm really convinced that if you live west of the M1 and even in Nerang, this is a project that's important to you. It's important to you as you try and get to school. It's important to you as you try and go to work, perhaps at the Robina Town Centre. And it's important to you as you perhaps, access social services that will soon be delivered on Robina Town Centre Drive itself. Or maybe it's important to you because we want people to be able to get in and out of the stadium safely to support participation there. It's a really important and essential project. And I know people might get spooked by the word urgency, which I've removed, but, it's urgent because we should have been halfway through construction. And usually infrastructure projects lag demand. So it's urgent because we probably should have done this 5 years ago. And I know that this is very different to the officer recommendation. I'm sure the director probably would have wanted something more robust than us just noting the report to begin with. I know it's significantly different, but I just want to make this point. I think that shows a lot of thought from a divisional councillor, because it takes some effort to craft a recommendation like this, and that's the counterbalance in our system of local government. City officers have put up a report, and as an elected representative, I've been afforded the opportunity to engage in my community, understand the issues on the ground, and craft something that is better. And I'd appreciate your support.
Thanks, Councillor Forster. Thanks, Councillor Forster, and thank you, Councillor Owen Jones, for helping with that wording as well. No, you can go to them. All right, councillors, that's item 6.3. We'll move on to, we've got a presentation on item 6.4, and if we can go to Mr Tilley, thank you.
Councillors, just by way of introduction, it's all about transport today, as you've gathered. So Matt's going to give us two presentations now. The first one is one of our series of updates on light rail.
Thank you, Alton. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, councillors. I'll get through this as efficiently as I can and certainly field any questions that you have as we go through. So the purpose of today was to give you, like Alton says, an update on where we as an organisation, but where the project is heading in relation to light rail stage 3. There's been some great progress in the last several months, and I'll give you a bit of a flyover there about that update, where we're up to with the business engagement task, and what works have proceeded and what the look ahead is, and we'll give you a bit of a fly through at the end as well. Okay, so in terms of a general project update, we have been, as part of the partnership with the state government leading the way, we have agreed an early works arrangement with, or the state has agreed an early works arrangement with John Holland. We think we communicated that, and it certainly was in the media in recent months. Really, that's enabled the partnership to proceed with a whole suite of activities in advance of what's called financial close, which is scheduled at the moment for later in 2021. In terms of the governance, which has really sped up, if you like, in the last couple of months, the external or the multi-partner arrangement has really taken form. We have a three-tier governance system, tier one being our executive at the table with the GoldLink and TMR executive as well. Tier two, we've got a two-part tier two governance. I represent the city on what's called the broader project tier two meeting, which is once a fortnight, and also Gold Coast Water and Waste have their own tier two governance in place as well because of the bespoke needs of that particular directorate. A third tier is a suite of technical governances, where we have our project team, our subject matter experts at the table contributing to the outcomes. Internally, we do have a PCG, a multi-directorate PCG, and a multi-directorate executive steerco as well to make sure that as a city, we've got our ducks in line as we represent across the partnership. Business engagement, so in July through to late August, John Holland Group really ramped up their business engagement process. They own that process as part of the project, and they delivered, as you see there, 26,000 newsletters. They've door knocked as well, businesses along the corridor, and certainly the feedback from them. You can see the example of the newsletter on the right of the screen there. The sentiment has been quite positive thus far. In terms of the next steps, again, John Holland consortia-led business engagement plan. They will have precinct managers, not dissimilar to what worked very well in stage one in terms of the level of business engagement and the learnings taken from that. There's a suite of information and collateral available that the consortia is going to promote the use of by those businesses, and to certainly make sure that our staff in the project team are making sure that our local stakeholders are getting the best level of service from the project, and ensuring that the likes of Councillor Young and Councillor McDonald particularly are kept up to date through that process as well. There is also a business advisory group, as there was in the previous stages, where I represent the city, that meets once every couple of months and has representatives from across the Gold Coast business community to make sure that there is a regular communication flow and the right communication flow about the project, both opportunities and impacts. There's a suite of early works that we have delivered in unison with the state. Certainly a great example of this was the conversion of a staggered T arrangement at Acanthus Avenue and Simmons Road there, delivered ahead of schedule and ahead of budget. State-funded project that our TNT delivered with our internal delivery partners. Fantastic outcome for the community there, and some great feedback from the local community, both during construction. We had some kids who enjoyed watching the construction unfold, but also in the post-construction phase as well. I know we've got some great feedback from customers on that one. There's a whole lot of Gold Coast Water and Waste early works underway as well, and this is another state-funded element. It's called a pressure monitoring leak detection system, which really ensures or is a significant risk mitigation for ensuring that there is minimal disruption to water supply during that construction phase. We're also expediting some water main renewals as well. These have progressed very well. We've done these as night works, and obviously there's the appropriate night works management plans along the corridor there. There's a host of very localised active transport projects that we're proceeding with as well, again to enhance the safe connectivity from the surrounding areas into those station precincts. Very rapidly, in terms of the look ahead, on the 30th of August, John Holland Group started the establishment of their site compound at Broadbeach South, and they'll be there for the duration of the project. We've already commenced what's called the design management review process, and already we've seen benefit of having, if you like, practice processes in place to make sure that when the dam breaks and we do get this very high flow of design review tasks, that we are in the best place possible to ensure that all city stakeholders, internal city stakeholders, have a seat at the table to make sure our needs are represented there. I'll just show a couple of examples. These are the kind of things, just to show you there's a whole lot of collateral that is being progressed by John Holland. This is about the site mobilisation. These are dropped off at all the residents and businesses on the way. And as per the next slide, same again about things like utility investigations as well. So there is a fair amount of collateral in terms of community information that is being disseminated to the public at the moment.
Can we just go back a slide, Madam Chair? I just want to focus on that last point there. Major construction to commence by the end of 2021. at which time it'll have been 4 years since stage 2 finished. Like, I can't understand, and the message needs to be sent really clearly, that this needs to be a continual program of construction where we roll from one stage to the next, and we need to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time so that we're planning whilst we're doing construction. Otherwise, this is going to take 2 or 3 times as long to deliver in a reasonable network than what it should. And if you extrapolate the timelines out, getting the next couple of stages done, like, it will end up being that we're lucky to get it to the airport by the Olympics. And maybe that becomes their goal because that's okay, but it's not okay. That's 4 years, which to me represents 2 stages of construction lost. So just to comment to the world at large, that the state government, if they want to get serious about delivering this thing, they've got to be doing it at a much faster pace and a continual rolling program of construction. I've said it before, and I said that we need to make this business as usual for this to be constructed for a generation of Gold Coasters, at which time we will get to a point where it has a reasonable prospect of being a meaningful, integrated transport network. And here we are looking at a screen that says it's been 4 years. So I just want to make that point because I don't really want to be sitting here 4 years after we get to Burleigh saying, oh, wow, look, we're about to start going to the airport. It's not good enough. And we can't keep dragging it out. The people in Palm Beach, the reason that they're so apprehensive about it is because this great unknown thing that's sitting there waiting, and it's going to be a decade or more from when it got to Broadbeach to when it gets anywhere near Palm Beach. No wonder they get upset about it. They don't know when it's coming. They then don't get the experience, and it's the whole unknown. Like, we've got to give these people the real meaningful opportunity to utilise the investment because they're all paying for it. We're all paying for the light rail, and it's not going far enough, quick enough.
Hear, hear.
Yeah, can I just add to that? Thanks, Madam Chair. Just a quick add to that is, and further to what you just said, Councillor Corbell, the state and federal governments need to commit and shore up their percentage of their funding now for stage 4. Thank you.
Well, again, it should just be a pro forma. There should be no silly bugger arguments every time we get to a stage to say, have this whole fake negotiation about how much everyone puts in. There should be a same approach, stage after stage after stage. If the number that council puts in is 11% or 12%, as it's been for the last 3 stages, why would that need to change for stage 4? There's no compelling reason why anything needs to change. If we've got a formula that's worked, we just need to keep doing it.
Thanks, Councillor Corbell. I'll go to Councillor Owen Jones. Matt, if that's all right, and then we'll go back to that last slide.
I agree wholeheartedly with all of that. My only addition is that it's not just a state government issue. It's actually the state parliament needs to be consistently behind delivering a appropriate light rail infrastructure to the Gold Coast rather than it, being an opposition government thing. It's actually all of the elected representatives need to understand how important it is that we actually get on with it rather than stop and start every 2 years or 4 years.
Okay, we'll let Matt finish. Thank you, Councillor Owen Jones, and agree as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I assure you, councillors, we'll bring an update about light rail stage 4 to the next committee as well, and we'll have a conversation certainly about that then. And the final slide before the fly-through is around the type of works that we'll see over the next few months. So certainly it's around that early utilities investigation. So, like I say, standard early works, if I can say that. There'll be a fair bit of high-vis on the corridor in the next few months. So without further ado, I will throw to Sandy to do her technology thing.
Would you like my jacket?
No. Thank you. Turn it up.
Thank you, councillors.
Councillor Owen Jones.
Question. So Matt, you've told us that they'll substantially be starting work by the end of 2021. Probably the follow-up question to that is, when do you think they will be substantially finishing work, and will be actually able to travel on stage 3?
Through you, Madam Chair. As far as I'm aware, the current schedule pushes into 2024. I think that's been made public in recent times. The schedule has shifted for a variety of reasons, which have been again made public. So that's the current schedule. And like I said, all parties involved behind the scenes are doing what they can to bring that into effect.
Early 2024 or late
20. March 2020.
I hesitate to put an exact date.
Councillor Worcester.
Not a difficult question, I don't think. But the Broadbeach South Station, I think, works really well because you've got a good bus interchange happening there at the terminus. And I'm assuming that heading south, that's not going to change because that Broadbeach interchange is good for the east-west connections. Just looking at the flyover though, when you do reach to the end of Burleigh, I didn't see much overlay or queuing capacity for buses kind of heading south, maybe with the 777 or what have you. Are we fairly comfortable that we're not going to have bus queuing issues causing congestion? I'm sure it would have been contemplated, but I just thought I'd ask the question.
Yeah, through Madam Chair, you're absolutely right, Councillor Vorster. It was contemplated a lot during that business case phase, and engaged with the local community at that time as well around where the buses would, not only the interchange, the passenger interchange would be, but where the storage would be as well. So that's all been built into the plan for Burleigh Heads.
That's just a presentation, so do we need to note it or just, yeah. Okay, Councillor Young.
Further to that then, I wonder, where is that to be? Can you give us some detail, please?
Through you, Madam Chair, I'll find the latest plan, Councillor Young, if you don't mind, to make sure that I can provide because I know there were a few options considered. There's some locations actually on the highway, and also within the, I think it's mostly on the Gold Coast Highway. I'll triple check that for you, though, Councillor, and make sure I give you the accurate answer.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Young. That's item 6.3, and we're just noting that as a presentation. And we'll go to item 6.4, which is the bike share scheme update. 6.5, yep.
Similar thing, councillors, so we're bringing you a couple of updates here just on a couple of these projects. It's been a while since we've come back to you with this one, so we've had some community interest of late, so we thought we'd take the opportunity just to give you an update on how the scheme is progressing.
Thanks, Alton. Through Madam Chair. Sorry, it's me again. So the purpose of this update, as Alton says, to give you an update. The system has reached, I think we're in about month 9 now of this bike share scheme Mark II. So certainly it's timely to give you an update on how the usage is normalised and some of the learnings thus far and the opportunities about where to from here. So for those who haven't had a chance to utilise the system yet, it's a system of electric assisted bicycles that can travel up to 25 k's an hour. They are dockless, as you would have seen, no doubt, and the service area is the geometry shown on the screen there. So it extends north to Runaway Bay, south to Burleigh Heads, and captures a couple of the non-coastal centres, which was a positive change from Bike Share Stage 1. And I'll loop back to the geographic area towards the back end of the presentation, because we are looking to expand that in partnership with Lime. The metrics are pretty good, and I think to put these in context, so at a time when the previous supplier had around 800 bikes in the system, we had around about 21,000 unique riders. So to put it in perspective, we've got more than double the number of unique riders at the moment, with around about 650 bikes in the system. I disaggregate a few of these metrics over the next few slides. I'll do so in a fairly efficient way for you though. So the number of trips and unique riders per month there, trips being the I guess you call it the teal coloured. So you can see the trips are trending upwards. July was a little bit of an anomaly because of things like a weekend of lockdown in there, but the number of unique riders is increasing as well. So what that essentially tells me that there's more riders and they're using their bikes more often as well. The user profile is something obviously we keep an eye on in terms of the marketing and the communication about the scheme. The vast majority of users are Gold Coast residents. As you can see there are very few SEQ visitors and a slightly higher number of non-South East Queensland visitors using the system as well.
Definitely, we noticed in the profile of the previous scheme that there was quite a significant amount of non-local use as well, but here it's predominantly local.
Number of bikes in service. So it's one of the metrics that we do keep in regular communication with Lime about. We want to make sure that the scheme is being expanded. They naturally want to make sure that the supply and demand metrics are about right, should we say, that there's not a lot of bikes being underutilised. So we're about 650 at the moment in use. They usually work on around about a 10% of bikes being maintained, cleaned, etc. and so on. So that's why the numbers there are just under 600 at the end of July. I should say all this data is accurate to the end of July. At the time of production of this material, obviously we didn't have the end of August data to hand, but we do collect this data each month and we can tap into any of the data on a reasonably live basis as well. Median trip duration, again, one of our KPIs for this from a network offering point of view is to make sure that we can offer the transition from the human-powered bikes to the electric-assisted bikes was that we can lengthen the trips, and obviously that goes hand in hand with trip duration. We're working on around about a 10-minute average trip duration at the moment, which translates into the next slide into about a 1.5 to 2 kilometre distance trip. So I've asked the guys already to see whether we can look at our marketing to see if we can market more long distance trips. What this does show though is that this is working extremely well in terms of what we would call a first mile and last mile offering, almost literally if you take the metrics, the imperial measurement there. So it's serving its primary purpose, which was first mile, last mile mobility. What we can do with the electric assisted bikes though is certainly look to extend the distances and see whether we can tap into that longer distance trip market. Here's a graphic that is interesting on face value. So what this shows is an example of vehicle movements in one day. So the start of the trip being in the red end of the arc and the end of the trip being the green, and we can see roughly where the trips are starting and ending. So origin destination style analysis, and what we can see there, heavy usage on the coastal corridors, but also some really great inter and intra-suburban trips away from the coastline as well. So just an example, if you like, of the type of data that we do tend to analyse nowadays. So the next steps, I'll come back to service expansion in a second. Helmet uptake and availability, not big surprise. It's not as big, anywhere near as big issue as what it was perhaps with Mobike initially. It is something that Lime are constantly looking at ways in which they can improve the availability of helmets. Can I say there are a lot of users who choose personally not to use helmets with the system. Now that's something that obviously is not something we'd recommend, but certainly the helmet availability is something we'll work with Lime on quite regularly to make sure that where a user does want to use a helmet, that there is one available with that bicycle. We are constantly working with Lime as well to make sure that very low cost or sometimes no cost infrastructure and operational enhancements, that we can affect those to the benefit of the scheme as well. Customer feedback is very important as part of the scheme, and something that Lime have been very proactive in, can I say, and very positive on. Certainly, you can see there the yellow dots represent the pickup points of the bike, so you can see some of them do lie outside of the defined geographic zone. Now that then translates into our intention and what to work with Lime and let's talk about expanding this service area west, north and south to make sure that we can again positively promote this for inter-suburban trips away from that coastline as well. So this is very much a live conversation, and it's going very well thus far. Obviously it needs to tick a whole lot of boxes from Lime's point of view to make sure we do affect that. The other really positive element here is that we do have some, can I say, partners in industry, and in this instance Griffith, whereby they have taken it upon themselves to really do almost like a sub-partnership with Lime to make sure that there is a very high visibility of the e-bikes available at their campus, and make sure that their students and their staff and visitors to the campus do know that this is a legitimate mode of transport, and it does link with some of the other mass transit options in the city as well. We'll be exploring more things like this in partnership with Lime as well. Thank you, councillors. That's my final slide.
Peter Young, and I'll just go all the way along. So, Councillor Gates, off you go.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question about their policy in regard to pickup. Do they hope that someone else will grab that bike and take it away and use it, or do they have a time frame for collection of bikes that have been used and left on the side of the street?
Through Madam Chair, thank you, Councillor Gates. Not a dissimilar arrangement to what we had with Mobike. There's a territory management component of their contract whereby if bicycles are left in an unsafe area, be it unsafe for other users, be it unsafe for the bike itself, then that gets a priority call and they will sweep those up pretty quickly. If they're left in areas where it's of slightly less convenience for future users, then they'll be slightly less priority, but they do have a sweeping system. I must say the territory management of Lime has been very good, and Mobike's improved a lot along the way, but Lime's territory management thus far has been very good, and hence the reason we've had, can I say, a very small number of complaints from the public about the location of bikes that aren't being used.
So are they responsive only to calls about or complaint? Like if a bike's left on a street for a week or so, they have no time frame built in to collect that bike?
Through Madam Chair, the bikes are GPS tracked. They will know where each of their bikes in the fleet are, hence the reason the ones that are outside the geographic area, they'll sweep them up pretty quickly because they're not able to be reused, if you like. They can't commence the use. Like I said, other ones that are the sweeping system we have, our outdoor guys will ring them in as well. So there's almost like a collective effort to identify if there are bikes that are left either on the road, in the carriageway, for example, priority one, on a footpath next to a road, priority one. If they're just left in an area that you think, well, they shouldn't really have been left there, then they'll sweep them up as well. So it's responsive if they haven't already identified it as part of their digital territory management, if that makes sense.
Okay, okay.
Thank you. How are the bikes charged and how do they keep them charged?
This one.
Through you, Madam Chair, there's two processes. There's a battery swap out process, and then when they're collected for regular maintenance, they take them back to the depot and charge them up there.
So when you hire a bike or take a bike, it may be, the battery might be flat, you might be, or near flat, and you might not get much out of it.
Through you, Madam Chair, that should not be the case. I mean, there is a potential, if that particular bike has been heavily used on a particular day and it's been run down, I guess there is a chance towards the end of the day.
I think through you, Madam Chair, as well, there is a system, just like the geographical location, their digitised management system does indicate that the bikes that are running very low on battery as well, it's part of their territory management process.
That's right. So have we got any indication of average cost to the users? Like we've got
through Madam Chair, not expressly. I'll see what we can derive from Lime. That might be some commercial information that we might not be have full access to, though. But it is based on access, time, and distance, so we can derive a likely cost per use based on the statistics we do have.
Thanks. Yes, we've got a graph here of the median trip duration, which is currently around about 9 minutes, and never varied much from that. Be interesting to know what those costs are, if we could get that separately. Thank you. Chair.
Thank you. With these bikes, there seems to be a lot less just left in shocking places that we saw with the previous bikes. But one thing with these bikes is that you'll see them in somewhere that's safe, probably ticks all the boxes of where it is, but a simple matter of leaving a bike lying down versus standing really gives a very different impression to residents. Is there a way for them to communicate with their users, or possibly even provide an incentive for their users to just stand the bike rather than just leaving it flat?
Through you, Chair, I think that is part of the information, the user guides, can I say? Sometimes the bikes do topple over not at the means of the user. Sometimes they can topple over in wind, or a non-user can knock them over, kind of thing. So, but it is part of the information that they have about how essentially, it's my phrase, not theirs, but how to essentially use the bikes as they're intended to be used.
Well, I'd just say that's really my only concern. I see them lying flat often, And whenever I'm walking past, I'm picking up bikes because I can't.
I can certainly pass that
Very good.
feedback on to
Thank you.
Lime. Thank you, Councillor.
And just a bit more feedback on that, I have passed that on in the past too, and a lot of it is it's like those days where you go out for a walk and there's 10 wheelie bins lying down on the side of the road. If they want to, they come out, and I've seen it happen in the early hours of the morning where there've been, half a dozen bikes there again, and they think, if you push that first one, let's see if it dominoes. Yeah, and they think it's a great joke. So unfortunately, sometimes it cannot be the behaviour of the user, but the behaviour of those less community orientated people. Councillor Bale and Lumsden, do you have any questions? No. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you. Through the chair, first of all, when it first came out, first 6 months, we were having a lot of problems with them all being around the streets, and I must admit they've really improved that that side of it. We do see them out there, and I think there's been a big improvement, the clean-up. I think also education as well, because they're new. I think the more we can educate people to respect, I think it's like anything we have out in the community. So I think majority of the people are now getting used to it and are putting it in appropriate spots. I have seen, and this will come back to my electric scooters on active transport and pass down the track, but I've heard some devices or some of these schemes got the ability to control them, their speeds or by GPS control measures, and I'm not sure whether this is something that Lime has ability of doing or the ability of looking at down the future. So I believe it's in Brisbane where there's certain areas through the main streets that they actually reduce the speed of the actual scooters, so when they're in high density areas. So it's just something to ask a question, because my understanding is in Brisbane and there's other modes out there that can do that. To Councillor Gates, my understanding they've got 4 hours to pick them up if it's in a dangerous position, and I think they've got 24 hours to actually move them if they've been left in one spot, but they do act from complaints as well. So, yeah, but look, as I said, I think there's been a massive improvement. Yes, we are in COVID times, so it'd be interesting to see what happens when the city's activated, but from where I was 12 months ago, there's been a big improvement.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, through you to the Director or to Matt or to the City Officer responsible for the contract management, I'd be really interested in seeing a histogram of the idle time of the fleet of bikes, because that will show us the number of bikes that have not moved after 10 days, for example, and what proportion that is of the overall fleet. I think that will actually be the most instructive thing for us to see whether the fleet of bikes are being utilised and how many cases there are of bikes that are there for a fortnight. I've seen a few of them that sit there for over a fortnight. Yeah, so the ones that stick out. So if they can provide us with a histogram of the frequency that bikes are sitting idle, and they can take that as a moment in time. In fact, why not use today? So as of 11:30 a.m. on Tuesday, the 7th of September, can they provide us with a histogram to show us what proportion of bikes have been sitting there for X number of days? Simple histogram. And by the way, I don't ask for that to argue in favour or against. I just think that's principally the root of many of our questions. And I just had a question about geofencing. So geofencing is great because it gives us the ability of prohibiting the bikes from operating in particular areas, not being able to tap off, as it were. Do we have the ability to, as council or as a council law, provide feedback to Lime about areas where we would not like to see bikes parked, and how fine-grained can that zone be? I'll tell you why. Vision Australia, who look after those with low vision, are headquartered in Robina, and they've got a lot of clients with low vision who need to traverse complex intersections around a busy area and footpaths and what have you. And there's a risk of their clients coming into conflict with bikes. And I would love the ability to somehow work with Lime through a council resolution or what have you, to say, you know what, we've got some sensitive users. Can we make that this frontage of this particular area, you cannot just leave your bike on a footpath. There are some intersections, for example, the intersection of Cheltenham and Robina Parkway, where we've got a very narrow non-DDA compliant footpath. It's probably only 500 mil less, right, wide, and it falls straight into the curb, so it's very challenging. And there are often bikes on that footpath. So I'd love the ability to exclude the bikes from being put there all together, rather than having to phone up or send an email to make a complaint, because even then 24 hours is too long.
Through you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Councillor Horser. It's a great point. My understanding is that, yes, we can geofence areas for priority use, or can I say non-use. The fine-grained nature of the question, I might need to look into that a bit further, because, like I said, it will be down to the user understanding of that fine-grained nature of the system as well, if that makes sense. So there might be the disincentive to not leaving a bike in a certain case. Is it the fact that the bike doesn't lock itself out, or is it the fact that the user gets charged more, etc., and so on? I need to look into that further.
And in those high-risk situations, I'd want to keep the clock ticking. It's you know, it's similar when we use our e-parking bays and people drive off without tapping off and what have you. The clock keeps ticking. Same sort of thing. Yeah.
Thanks, Councillor Vorster. Councillor O'Neill, did you have anything to contribute? All right, councillors, we note that presentation as well. That's item 6.5. All right, that seems to be all of our agenda items today. Did we have any general business at all? Anything else? All right.